Noon, and welcome to the Lunchroom on Radio Caribbean International. It's Friday, the 15th of November, 2024. This is program number 1284 of the Lunchroom, and I'm your host, Calixte George Jr. Now, of course, you can get us at 101.1 FM, that's our radio frequency, but you can also reach us online. You can get us on our website, that is rcisenusha.com. You can download our previous shows on that platform as well if you missed it. And we are also streaming live on Facebook. You just have to search for the official page of Radio Caribbean International. And of course, please be sure to like and share that link as well with your friends and family. Now, if you want to call in to tell us what's on your plate today, the number to do so is 452-3046, 452-3046, as well as our WhatsApp number 724-0008. Again, if you want to reach us via WhatsApp, you can message in or you can call in on that number. And again, it's 724-0008. Now, I want to send out some birthday greetings today. First, Mrs. Sue Morplazy, happy birthday to you. And we wish you an absolutely wonderful and fantastic birthday celebration. Also to Miss Blossom Paul, who's celebrating her birthday today. Happy birthday to you, Blossom. Hope you're having an amazing birthday celebration. And as well to Patricia Ann Wardrobe, happy birthday to you. Wishing you plenty of blessings on your very special birthday. Now, we want to take a look down history on this day. And back in the year 1492 on this day, of course, Christopher Columbus noted in his journal the first recorded reference to tobacco. 1884, on this day, November 15th, European colonization and trade in Africa are officially regulated at the International Berlin Conference, formalizing what is known as the Scramble for Africa among European powers. 1904, on this day, saw King C. Gillette patenting the safety razor as the Gillette razor blade. 1948, on this day, Mackenzie King retired after 21 years and 154 days as Prime Minister of Canada. 1969, on November the 15th, an estimated 2 million people took part in the Vietnam War moratorium demonstration across the United States. And in 2017, on this day, November the 15th, Leonardo da Vinci's painting, Salvator Mundi, Savior of the World, sold for $450.3 million at an auction in New York. And that was a world record price for any piece of art. We now move on to our dish of the day.
Serving now, the Daily Dish.
And welcome back to our program for today. Now, we're waiting a guest to come in, as I mentioned earlier, yesterday during the week. We should be getting a visit by Ambassador Peter Lansico. I assume he's on his way right about now. And we'll be speaking about Cuba in particular. And the crisis. It's been in a difficult situation for quite some time, of course. But we're speaking about that. We'll be touching base with him, individual who, in fact, studied and lived in Cuba for a good number of years. So we'll be looking forward to that once he arrives. But first, let me extend some condolences to the family of Mrs. Lorraine Charles St. Jules. She was formerly the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of the St. Lucia Tourism Authority. And unfortunately, word came yesterday evening of her passing. She was fighting the good fight with respect to the Big C and had been overseas for some months now and was recovering. And unfortunately, certainly this would perhaps come as a bit of a shock for many individuals who would have interacted with her right here in St. Lucia, particularly, of course, in her last professional capacity as the CEO of the SLTA, the St. Lucia Tourism Authority. Certainly a very humble, affable, very kind hearted individual. And she was known by many. And no doubt we want to extend our condolences to her family. Of course, in particular, Mr. Embert Charles, her brother, and her mother. I mean, they've been going through a bit of a hard time. I think this would be his third sibling to have, in fact, passed over the past couple of years. And of course, Mr. Leslie Charles, another sibling, in fact, just passed last year. So certainly a difficult time for the family, and we want to extend our condolences to the family of the late Mrs. Lorraine Charles and Jules, and of course as well to her husband at this really, really difficult time. So, of course, as I mentioned, we're going to have a conversation with respect to Cuba. And of course, it's also Cuba in, I suppose, the wake of the US general election as well, which we are still seeing the actions coming out of that in the past week. A lot of announcements of who is supposed to be heading into which department, and some very interesting and controversial appointments being made, of course, by or expected appointments, I should say, because they in fact have not yet been ratified by the Congress. That has to happen first, and of course, he is not yet, in fact, the President of the United States. The government continues to function, and of course, during this transition period, as it is in right now, up until January the 20th of 2025. So there's that, and of course, a lot more to discuss. But that's our dish of the day. When we come back, we're going to be speaking to St. Lucia's ambassador to Alba, and he is none other than His Excellency, Mr. Peter Lancic. I'll be right back.
This has been The Daily Dish.
And welcome back to the program. Thanks for joining us. Of course, for all those who are enjoying their Friday. And unfortunately, you would have had a little bit of a disappointment if you were at the Darren Simon Cricket Ground yesterday. The West Indies were not able to defeat England in that T20, which kicked off around 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. These T20 matches are a little earlier than what we're usually accustomed to. Quite often they start at around 7 o'clock. I suppose maybe the demographic of the English side may be a factor in this, the time difference between the UK and us. So we're seeing a slightly early match, 4 o'clock, which is in fact pretty good for the seniors and for children in particular. Of course, there were a number of school children who were in fact present at the match. And so we certainly think that that's a really great way of them enjoying the moment. But of course, it did mean yesterday that the West Indies ended up losing that T20 series. I think they've lost 3 matches of the 5 matches. But of course, we do hope that there'll still be a pretty good turnout come the weekend, Saturday and Sunday at 4 o'clock at the Darren Simon Cricket Ground, where they will be hoping to, of course, try to at least get some of a competitive series, 2 matches to go. And considering where they were, at one point, I think they were as low as 24 for 4. And they were able to eventually pick up and make 145 runs. But that was not enough, wasn't competitive enough for a match against England. But enough of the cricket for the time, and we want to switch gears to some pretty important matters. And just yesterday, a caller was lamenting that quite often we're not hearing enough about matters within the Caribbean basin, important geopolitical matters impacting us, impacting our neighbors. We're hearing quite a lot about the United States right now, of course, and Ukraine and Europe. And we're hearing lots about Israel and Gaza and the conflicts there. Those do certainly have some level of impact on what we're experiencing right now, issues of inflation, for example. But the matter of Haiti and the matter of Cuba, which find themselves on the second and first largest islands on within our archipelago, quite often seem to be somewhat forgotten. And so I'm very pleased that we can, in fact, have this engagement this afternoon with His Excellency Ambassador Peter Lansico. He is St. Lucia's representative to Alba. Of course, he'll and Venezuela and Mexico as well. And thanks for pointing this out. Welcome to the program as well. And CELAC as well, of course. And that CELAC is a grouping of Latin American and Caribbean countries. Somewhat a little different, of course, from the Organization of American States, which in fact also includes those very same countries as well as the North American giant, that of the United States and Canada. So, of course, welcome to the program, Ambassador Lansico. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for the welcome. Thank you for this very extended introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
Indeed. And of course, you made the point. Thanks for reminding me that your remit is, in fact, not merely ALBA. And ALBA, of course, that grouping formed in large measure by Hugo Chavez and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, a hope to sort of have a bit of a counterbalance in terms of the diplomatic relations within Latin America. But beyond that, of course, you're also representing, as you mentioned, of course, Venezuela directly, as well as Mexico.
Yeah. Just to remind folks that ALBA was really the brainchild of Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro. So those two leaders got together and decided that they needed to create the mechanism. ALBA means Bolivarian Alliance. They would say in Spanish, Alianza Bolivariana. The Bolivarian Alliance, the word Bolivarian derives from the name Bolivar. As we know, Simon Bolivar was the supreme liberator of Venezuela. And for the information of many St. Lucians, Simon Bolivar was Venezuela's greatest general in its history. And there's a very important anecdote surrounding him because a St. Lucian soldier by the name of Jean-Baptiste Bidot actually saved the general's life at one time at a particular point during the Venezuelan War of Independence. So this is one of the reasons St. Lucia is always very big on Venezuela. And St. Lucia is very well known by Venezuelan historians in that regard. So the Bolivarian Alliance, as Calixte was saying, is really meant to infuse a greater awareness and a greater sense of independence of Caribbean and Latin American foreign policy. And we will be speaking today on the matter of Cuba, and you will see that the bottom line, the underpinning factor where Cuba is concerned is the matter of independence, political, economic independence of our countries. And Cuba is the supreme foundational example of that aspiration of ours in the region. So it's going to be a pleasure to speak with colleagues today on the matter of Cuban foreign policy.
Thanks for that, in fact, because this is a very good context for the conversation. Cuba, as we know, has been a really interesting case of colonialism, and its post-colonial history has also been marred by a lot of challenges. Even coming out from, so to speak, the control and the ambit of the Spanish Empire, it then faced another empire, so to speak, in that of the American influence that came to it, especially during the whole Spanish-American War. And America effectively saw it as a bit of an extension of itself, perhaps a 52nd state or 53rd state, if it could.
Well, I suspect that many persons, um, I'm sorry, Calix. I suspect that many persons in the United States, particularly among the policymakers today, may be regretting that the United States never just openly invaded Cuba and took over. Of course, that would have been a bloodshed. It would have been a serious. They would have had to kill nearly all the Cubans, because Cuba has had hundreds of years of struggle for their independence, and the Cubans don't joke around their independence. So no matter how much difficulty they face maintaining the country as an independent state in the Americas, Cubans take great pride in their independence, and I think the Americans have finally come to accept that. Now, unfortunately, there's a new crop of politicians in the U.S., and who some of them obviously have not properly read the history. And so there's some misunderstandings that they have where Cuba is concerned. Cuba is not going down, and the Cuban Revolution is not going down. You can rest assured, Calixte, because there's just too many years of a history of struggle in Cuba, and so the revolution is here to stay. Rest assured.
Cuba came about, I mean, in terms of the revolution in particular, at a pretty interesting juncture. Globally, of course. You had the Cold War, going on between the United States and the USSR.
That's right.
You had the two ideologies competing across the world. United States representing this emblem of the West and democracy, as of course has been put forward. And then, of course, you had the socialist communist model being propagated by the USSR as well as People's Republic of China in particular.
That's right.
And then, of course, Cuba came into this mix as a socialist communist country on the doorsteps of the United States of America, the world's greatest democracy,
Right.
as of course it's quite often portrayed. That was, of course, I mean, and this came up from the Cuban desire themselves. Is that seen? Is that a very hurtful thing, you think? But is it seen as a hurtful thing for the United States that here you have a system of communism right on their doorsteps?
It's hurtful, if you want to call it hurtful. You see, as you know, the Americans came up with the Monroe Doctrine. And the Monroe Doctrine clearly states that America is the big dog in the region. for one to, that colloquial term there, the big dog with a big stick in the region. And so a country like Cuba was not supposed to exist. A socialist country like Cuba was not supposed to exist on the so-called America's doorsteps. But like I said to you, Calix, the Cuban experience, like the Venezuelan experience, is hundreds of years of struggle against colonialism in its various manifestations, including imperialism. And so the Cuban Revolution was very successful, fortunately, because they had a very unique leader called Fidel Castro Ruz, a man sent by God indeed for the political liberation of Cuba. He was produced by history. He was a product of history. And in Marxism-Leninism, there is something we refer to as historical necessity. Fidel Castro arose out of historical necessity. There came a time in Cuba's history when it was in Cuba's history when it was necessary for someone to emerge, to solidify the revolution. And so Fidel Castro emerged, a product of history. And so Fidel, in effect, was the military leader of the Cuban Revolution. Before Fidel, there was Jose Marti, who was the spiritual, and he was a spiritual founder of the revolution in a sense. In fact, sometimes we call him the intellectual author of the Cuban Revolution. And when Fidel was born, Fidel grew at a very young age. He was already quite unique in his views, his political views, and of course, in the tradition of the Cuban historical struggle for independence and liberation from colonialism in all its manifestations, Fidel became the supreme leader. And of course, as you know, Calix, he became the military leader of the Cuban Revolution, the military and administrative author of the Cuban Revolution. And he was so powerful, Fidel was. He was so deeply convicted about his beliefs and the need for independence that he did a fantastic job solidifying and consolidating the Cuban Revolution throughout his life. And he died with his boots on in that respect. So Cuba's existence, sorry, Calix, Cuba's very existence is, as far as the Monroe Doctrine is concerned, the American Monroe Doctrine, Cuba's very existence is what you call, described a while ago as hurtful to the Americans.
Cuba has been able to grow and develop for the past couple of decades now under some pretty extreme conditions, of course, in terms of embargoes to the trade, as people quintessentially see it, has been locked in time. I mean, this image of Havana and these antique vehicles from the 1950s and 60s on the roads, and there's this sort of interesting portrayal of Cuba, of course. But of course, we do know that they've made progress in a number of other areas developmentally, but they've been able to do so through some very critical partners and friends. And I think of course, as we mentioned earlier on, the USSR, PRC, and then of course later on Venezuela. But that's changing though, and I'm thinking, of course, you no longer have the USSR, you now have Russia, which is a different kettle of fish to some degree, and you also now have a People's Republic of China, still communist certainly, but has changed in terms of it's more market open. It has a more open market. It's developed. It's now possibly maybe even the world's next superpower, if you so like. And how then though? I mean, in this current environment, how do you see this this triad of USSR, Russia, China, and Venezuela? Is there still that very strong connection between those countries and Cuba?
Absolutely, and it's growing even stronger now, because these countries, along with many other countries, have decided that they're breaking away from American hegemony in the world. And that's where BRICS comes in. BRICS is a product. BRICS is a very obvious and inevitable product of US foreign policy and Western imperialist foreign policy in general in the world. And of course, as you know, there's a phenomenon they call the weaponization of the US dollar. The US dollar has been the principal currency of exchange of goods and services in the world. And so when the United States decides that it's going to apply sanctions against Cuba, Venezuela, Russia, Nicaragua, every country that it doesn't quote unquote like, then, and of course the principal medium of exchange is the US dollar, then you have these countries being left with no choice but to break away from the US dollar. And that's why we have the decline of the US dollar in international trade as we speak. And there was just no getting away from the fact that BRICS would emerge, and BRICS is getting stronger and stronger every year. As you know, they began with the 5 countries: Brazil, Russia,
India, China, and South Africa.
that's right. And then an additional 6 countries joined last year, and an additional 13 partners were incorporated this year, including Cuba, of course. So the BRICS phenomenon is a result also of the increasing multipolarity of international relations in the world, so that the unipolar existence, the United States as the unipole, that's becoming quickly a thing of the past. And of course, unfortunately, the United States is doing what all empires have done when they begin to fail as an empire. They don't embrace failure, and so they begin to react badly. And so you would notice that in the new cabinet that Donald Trump is putting in place, they're basically all neocons and multi-millionaires and even billionaires. So it's going to be a very, very interesting cabinet of ministers that President Trump is putting in place. It is going to be a severe challenge for the world and for the BRICS countries in particular, etc., etc. And we have to be very, very, very careful. We have to tread very carefully with the international relations as of now. When Donald Trump becomes president, we are going to see some very, very concrete manifestations of an even colder war at this time. So we are seeing the re-emergence of a Cold War in international relations, a Cold War between China, the United States, and many other countries, Russia. Now, mind you, if you study your history well, you will understand that emergence, and you will understand that those countries really do not want to go to war. Russia and China do not want to go to war with anyone, right? Including the whole matter of the Ukrainian question. The Ukrainian question is something that's not properly understood by many world leaders. But more and more people are getting enlightened about what the real causes of the Ukraine war are,
You're going to have to hold that to just a bit, because we're actually due to take a break for our weather report. Marina is going to take us through that. And of course, when we come back, we'll continue to dive deeper into this matter regarding Cuba.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Calixte. And guests, we take a short break right now for the weather report. The weather report at this hour is made possible with the compliments of Island Style Thailand Bath.
Island Style, yeah. We got the time to make you go. We got the time to make you say, yeah. We'll have to make the right choice. Island Style, whoa. We got the time that will make you happy. Island Style, oh yeah. We make your dream come alive in Island Style. We have times and princess, pieces and brown. Everything you need is on the outside. For the best price and the latest style. Take a little drive down to Island Style car. We got the time to make you go. We got the time to make you say, yeah. Quality, price, service, choice. It's all at Island Style.
Visit us at our showrooms in Bellarosa, Rodney Bay, on the John Compton Highway, Cass Street, and behind Ruby's Gas Station on the Library Viewport Highway. So call us on 450-452 or 453-TILE. Island Style, Tile and Bath. When you think tile, think Island Style.
It is now time for the weather report.
This is Radio Caribbean International. It's now time for the weather news.
Let's take a look at the latest weather report as of 12 noon today. It's the 15th of November, 2024. Now our forecast to this hour is Webster Gajano. The forecast for St. Lucia valid for the next 24 hours. The winds will be blowing between the east and the southeast near 13 miles per hour or 20 kilometers per hour, becoming lighter and variable or calm at times. And the weather, fair to partly cloudy with a chance of a few showers. Again, the winds will be blowing between the east and the southeast near 13 miles per hour or 20 kilometers per hour, becoming lighter and variable or calm at times. And the weather, fair to partly cloudy with a chance of a few showers. On to the marine forecast for seas in a 25-mile or 40-kilometer radius from St. Lucia. For the Castries Harbor, we experience high tide at around 23 minutes before 3 this afternoon. The low tide will be at 26 minutes before 10 tonight. For the Vieux Bay, high tide will be at 16 minutes before 4 this afternoon and the low tide at a minute after 11 tonight. The seas light to moderate, the waves 3 to 5 feet, the same as 0.9 to 1.5 meters in open waters. The forecast for the Lesser Antilles. Over the leeward and the northern Windward Islands, partly cloudy to cloudy at times with scattered showers and a chance of isolated thunderstorms. And elsewhere, fair to partly cloudy with a few showers. Taking a look now at the tropical weather outlook. Light to moderate easterly to southeasterly winds are expected across the eastern Caribbean during the next couple of days. And a frontal trough will continue to cause cloudiness, showers, and possibly isolated thunderstorms over the northern half of the Lesser Antilles during the next 24 hours. Low-level clouds drifting along the wind flow will produce a few showers over the remainder of the region during the forecast period. And that is the official weather report. You can join us again in the morning at around 6:30. That's when our next report is due on the station. Thank you very much, Webster, for the update at this time. The weather was made possible by Island Style Tile and Bath.
This has been RCI's Weather News. For more information, call the Weather Hotline at 454-3452. RCI 101 number 1.
Island style, yeah. We got the time to make you go. We got the time to make you say, yeah. We'll have to make the right choice. Island style, whoa. We got the time that will make you happy. Island style, oh yeah. We make your dream come alive in Island style.
We have tiles and thin sets, pieces and ground. Everything you need is on the house out. For the best price and the latest style. Take a little drive down to Island Style Car.
We got the time to make you go. We got the time to make you say, quality rice, service choice. It's all an Island Style. Visit us at our showrooms in Belarus and Rodney Bay on the John Compton Highway, Cass Street, and behind Ruby's gas station on the Library Viewport Highway. So call us on 450-452 or 453 Tile. Island Style, Tile and Bath. When you think tile, think Island Style.
And welcome back to the Lunchroom here at Radio Caribbean International. It's about 21 minutes before the hour of 2 o'clock, and we're discussing the ongoing crisis with Cuba, with His Excellency Peter Lancico. He is St. Lucia's ambassador to ALBA, to CELAC, to Mexico, to Venezuela. And of course, he is also Cuban trained, as well as worked in Cuba at the St. Lucia embassy there as well. So he comes very, very well appointed in terms of his knowledge and understanding of these matters with respect to Cuba. We've, of course, maintained diplomatic relations with Cuba, as with many of the countries of CARICOM over the years, and the appeals have been made time and time again at forums like the United Nations General Assembly. And of course, we have benefited significantly from the generosity of the Cuban people. Cuban
Absolutely.
By way of particularly education as well as healthcare.
That's right.
Areas which they have, in fact, shown very, very, very well in. What is the current, you mentioned CELAC, of course, which is this newer grouping for Latin America and the Caribbean, more South-focused grouping. And what has been the reception and the word there in terms of CELAC and its voice, Latin America's voice, with respect to this still ongoing matter of embargoes against Cuba?
Well, the CELAC grouping, as you know, Calixte, the CELAC grouping has maintained consistently solidarity with Cuba. Because remember, Calixte, the essential fiber that exists in every single one of us Caribbean people is that we are not going to continue to bend over to colonialism and imperialism. We are not going to. And we have had enough examples in our history to have taught us that we need to be independent countries, friends of all and enemies of none.
Mm.
And of course, we saw the great examples in relatively recent history. We had Maurice Bishop in Grenada, who unfortunately was killed by his own comrades. Some people don't know the whole truth of that, but there was some serious undermining of the revolution by Western forces, and they succeeded in creating a wedge between comrades, brothers and sisters in the revolution, and they undermined the revolution. And so when Bernard Cord and these guys did what they did, they had been silently undermined by certain forces of Western imperialism. And then, of course, the Grenada Revolution was destroyed. We have had the greatest leader in the history of the area, Fidel Castro. Unforgettable. The best we have seen, the most staunch revolutionary we have seen, the most intelligent revolutionary we have seen.
And there's an interesting level of balance. I mean, I don't want to
Yes,
continue,
go right
there's
ahead.
an interesting level of balance regarding an individual like Fidel Castro. I mean, he wasn't clearly a thoughtless general. You know, he was a cultured individual in so very many ways.
Very educated.
Very, 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 very well educated. And I think too, even the balance that he was able to achieve with respect to Cuba, which is one of the reasons why so many people go there. He didn't come and say, hey, well, we're just going to demolish all of colonial Havana. He, in fact, friends, and all these wonderful historic areas and cities around Cuba. In fact, he preserved and found that balancing act between old and new.
Absolutely. And so Fidel was very successful in terms of the work he did for the Cuban Revolution. And while he was a great military strategist, he was also a powerful diplomat in his own right, you know. But he was a very firm diplomat, you know. And so he was highly respected by people all over the world.
I think of the visit of Pope John Paul II, for example.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And but yes, the CELAC countries, we continue to be a very firm group of countries. Unfortunately, we have had some difficulties. In recent times, Argentina has not been the typical CELAC member anymore because of a change of the politics in that country. As you know,
Javier Milei,
President Milei is cut from a different cloth. And so
very difficult times with them. I mean, he's come in with this idea that he's going to save Argentina, and he's significant hardship, cutting the civil service. And of course, but we have not seen that growth come back. It's actually gone into recession, hasn't it?
Yeah, but these old strategies don't work. This business of cutting the service, bending over to IMF prescriptions, these things have all failed in all countries where they have been applied. They don't work. You don't suddenly just put tens of thousands of persons out of work and believe and tell yourself this is an intelligent economic strategy. You don't do such things. You will recall, for example, in the United States itself.
That may be coming to the United States, as you're mentioning.
The time of
now,
the Great
now that
Depression.
Elon Musk is likely going to head the Department of Government Efficiency. It's a bit of an irony there that they're forming a new department to save, to cut other departments.
You know, one of the really sad realities we face in our friend to the north, the US, is that you're now going to be appointing ministers of government who are all billionaires and multi-millionaires. What do multi-millionaires care about struggling people? I mean, when you really come to think of it, you know. But yes, indeed, Calixte, Cuba continued to struggle. And when people judge Cuba by harshly, they say, well, if it's such a good system, how is it they have all those difficulties? Which country will not have difficulties when you face sanctions from the world's big superpower, the United States? And when Donald Trump came into office, he found the economic, commercial, and financial embargo in existence. Donald Trump added another 243 sanctions on the already existing sanctions. And there was a great contradiction, a very severe contradiction, in that when President Biden became president.
Right.
He left the
He kept.
additional sanctions that Donald Trump had
Just hold that
imposed
thought because we're trying to
upon
squeeze
Cuba.
in some calls as well,
Right.
Ambassador Lansico. Let's see if we can get some going here. Good afternoon and welcome to the lunchroom. What's on your plate today?
Yeah, good afternoon, Mr. Calixte. And I did listen to you and the Mr. Day.
Yes, caller, go right ahead.
Yes. And you're very interesting. I listened to him. But I read on the bricks he was mentioned. What the Mr. said, that's so interesting. Let me give you one example that greatest power using against this small nation, as you mentioned a while ago. Because you have a quarry, he tell you you're going to buy he have the machine, you're going to sell it the price you want. That's the example I'm using. So the brick system is a massive idea. With Venezuela and the name, I forget the name you mentioned, because
Alba.
we're too close to, we're closer to Venezuela, right? How our fuel is so expensive? Somebody regulating our fuel in the OECS against us, because the price of fuel we pay is too expensive. That's a robbery. That cannot be liters so high, and then they themselves sanction countries to getting the oil cheaper. Mr. Go ahead with your program. That's all. I don't have example, but I can't continue talking again. Can you give us the information Mr. giving there? Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that contribution, call. I mean, and that was, of course, one of the major inputs of Hugo Chavez and the whole creation of Petrocaribe as a means of trying to provide some cheaper oil, but as well to try to help in terms of debt management for countries as well. But of course, that is under considerable pressure due to the constraints and embargoes on Venezuela right now.
Absolutely. It's a very important observation by the caller, but the caller must understand that the prices of fuel are quite beyond our control. When we had the oil from Venezuela, it really helped big time. But the reason that this is so is because in St. Lucia and in the rest of the OECS, we can't really control these matters. These matters are out of our hands, you know. So with the war in Ukraine and the other instability around the world, there's basically shortage of fuel, right? And when you have relative shortages of supply of fuel, then the price rises. I invite the caller to do his own investigations on Google, and you will see that the prices are the same in all those islands. In all the islands, the price of fuel is higher, they're relatively high. And so these are matters beyond our control. But in fairness to the government does subsidize the purchase of fuel to quite an extent. And so if it was not for government intervention, the price of fuel would be even higher, Calixte, as you know. So I wanted to invite the caller to check out the other islands, and you will see that the prices are high all around.
Now coming back to the matter of Cuba, there was that time when there was a lot of hope in terms of the direction of Cuba, as you mentioned, especially during the Obama administration. But then we had also seen a certain level of cooperation with Canada and Trudeau, and we saw a number of hotel developments, in Veraderos, I think, Spanish hotels, Mexican hotels, Canadian hotels. In fact, there was even a fear amongst the rest of the Caribbean that when Cuba opens up, our tourism would be, placed in a downward spiral.
That was an irrational fear. That's from people who don't understand the way the economy works. But you are right. But
that was the perception.
There was that fear. There was that fear. Yeah.
But now, though, of course, Cuba has found itself into a pretty difficult circumstance. I mean, we know, of course, the support that they would have perhaps been getting from Venezuela has
dwindled a bit,
significantly. And the current situation, from all indications, is pretty dire.
Yes, indeed. And of course, but always remember, it's the economic embargo that has Cuba in that condition. And I've said in many of my writings, remove the embargo. I have challenged the powers that be to remove the embargo on Cuba, and you will see what's going to happen in Cuba. Cuba is going to become a mammoth a mammoth economic giant in the Caribbean if the embargo is removed. Because can you imagine Calixte operating an economy and you just can't buy even some basic supplies but that's going to change now with the emergence of BRICS. And you know, Cuba is now a partner in BRICS, and that's going to change dramatically with the decline of the US dollar. That's going to change dramatically. But for the moment, Calixte, an economic, commercial, and financial embargo against a country is a rough thing. And this is what's basically keeping down Cuban productivity.
How do you see this playing out? I mean, you did mention BRICS, but I mean, this has been an embargo that has been around for
60 years.
6 decades.
60 years.
Incredibly long period of time. And do you see an end? Do you see? I mean, when is it going to? I mean, when is it going to come to a point where the United States, you think, is simply going to give up on this approach?
When BRICS is properly established, and they have all the mechanisms in place, and they have the currency of exchange, right? The basket of currencies in terms of trade, and when the US dollar can no longer be used as a weapon against Cuban economic growth and development in the manner it is being used right now, the embargo will become an anachronism.
What is the situation with respect to China-Cuba relations? Where is that right now?
China and Cuba have excellent relations. China and Cuba have excellent relations because you must remember that the Chinese-Cuban relations have to do with their common position on colonialism and imperialism. These countries are anti-imperialist.
But is it still being stymied by the embargo reality? Because I think I mean, you're hearing a situation right now where Cuba has issues with its electric grid. It has an old, aging power
very
plant,
aging infrastructure,
transmission lines, very old. It needs to be replaced. And then yet still you have the world's largest factory, that of China, which could easily perhaps come in and transform a lot of the infrastructure that exists in Cuba.
You would assume that could happen that easily, but it's not the case because of the nature of the economic, commercial, and financial embargo against Cuba. The United States punishes not just Cuba, it punishes countries that trade with Cuba. Numerous countries all over the world, because the nature of the embargo is extraterritorial.
But isn't China the one country in the world right now that could, if it wanted, change that dynamic? Because I mean, the United States owns, China owns, I think, about $860 billion US worth of its debt. I mean, it's a huge amount of dependence that exists right now between the United States on China. Do you think that China needs to do a bit more?
Yeah, I believe China should and could do a little bit more, and they will be doing much more when BRICS is more firmly established. They will be doing much more because there will be much more trade out of the US dollar. But the big problem is that the US dollar has been the principal unit of exchange in the world today, but that's changing. As that changes, the embargo is going to become anachronistic and dysfunctional. It's going to be unnecessary, and they will eventually remove the embargo.
Are you satisfied with the current governance within Cuba? I mean, there's been some criticism that since the passing of Fidel and then Raul, there's not as much confidence perhaps in the leadership now in Cuba.
That's just all psychology. That's just all psychology. You see, people are going to miss Fidel forever until the new generations don't even remember who Fidel was anymore, or they never knew of Fidel. But so it's psychology. Look at Bob Marley. People say there can never be another Bob Marley because of the uniqueness of the man, because of the uniqueness of Maurice Bishop. Grenadians are going to take a long, long, long time before they forget Maurice Bishop. Likewise with Fidel, the uniqueness of Fidel. So it's hard for anybody else to fit in his shoes. So it's all psychology. But the reality is, whether it's Fidel or Raul or anybody, there's that embargo, that economic, commercial, and financial embargo that's stymieing the country's economic growth and development in so many ways.
But if the majority of the world is against this treatment of the Cuban embargo, I would think that certainly the majority of the countries of Latin America are. The majority of the countries in Africa.
Why haven't they resolved it?
Why is it that we cannot get over this?
Because of the principle, because of the role of the dollar in international trade. The role of the dollar in international trade. What I'm going to do, Calixte, is I'm going to take a closer look at that particular subject and come back on your show and share with the people of St. Lucia a deeper analysis of the issue. But the fundamental factor has been the role of the dollar in international trade. That's changing, and with that, we will start to see very pleasant changes for Cuba in terms of its economic growth.
Is the United States, you think, missing out on a great opportunity?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's all ideology and politics in the case of Cuba, because you must remember that the United States Chamber of Commerce is constantly up in arms against the policy. The United States businessmen want to trade with Cuba. The same way Canada trades with Cuba. U.S. businessmen want to trade, business persons want to trade with Cuba. Just look at the history of the United States Chamber of Commerce in this regard. So it's strictly politics and ideology that's been the spanner in the works.
At the CARICOM level, what are we doing? What can be done, you think?
Not much that we are not doing right now. Again, because of the fundamental positioning of the US dollar in international trade, international regional trade.
There were some pronouncements made by Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, about maybe trying to do some more tangible assistance and support.
Mia Mottley made a very fundamental statement in that regard recently. What she's talking about are things we already doing. There's a lot of assistance to Cuba in many ways, but we don't make much noise about it. St. Lucia, all the islands, in various ways, we assist Cuba as we can. But the Cubans are revolutionaries, and they all the Cubans really ask for is our solidarity, supporting the decision to continue to be an independent country no matter what.
I mean, of course, you mentioned, I mean, a lot of people went across to study in Cuba, but they're supporting our healthcare sector quite a bit right about now.
Absolutely. Cuba?
Manpower.
Cuba?
Yes.
Yeah,
Cuba.
Yeah, absolutely. Cuba continues to be a bulwark of support for us here. And as you know, there's a Cuban Medical Brigade in St. Lucia. There's the Cuban eye care program. We have had a little difficulty with that since COVID. Since COVID really messed up a lot of stuff. What really made it very difficult in that regard, though, was the difficulties moving to the new OKEU hospital. Unfortunately, the former Prime Minister was all gung-ho about making the OKEU hospital a private sector enterprise. You will recall, yes. They were all gung-ho about privatizing the hospital. And so when Cayman was brought in, it was all about privatizing the hospital. So if we had not stepped in as aggressively as we did, we would have had two major private hospitals in our country, Tapio and OKEU. But the contradiction with that, Calixte, as you know, is that the OKEU hospital was a gift from the taxpayers of the European Union to the taxpayers of St. Lucia. You recall my article on this?
I don't remember the article, but I know that as a fact.
I wrote a serious letter to the European Union on that matter while Prime Minister Chasney was in office.
I recall now.
I called it the corruption of EDF resources in St. Lucia. The OKEU hospital was a gift to the people of St. Lucia, not to any private businessman.
Right.
Chasney was about to turn it into a private company, a hospital. In effect, he was taking away the people's hospital and giving it to a private entity. And so the whole Cayman thing was part of that.
I recall that.
Yeah.
That now we're gonna have to put an end to it, unfortunately, because we're
Not
really
a
over time.
Yeah.
We of course definitely want to have you back.
Okay.
Certainly to explore some of the intricacies regarding the embargo and the extent of the embargo, and how you in fact see the rise of the BRICS, in fact, in changing this reality that Cuba finds itself in at this time.
Yeah, I'll be very happy to sit with you again at some point.
Definitely. Any parting words beyond that?
Well, basically, I really want to respond again to the last caller and to encourage him to just do some research, and he will see that we really don't have a choice in the matter of the price of fuel. We that's out of our hands. But what the government
there's a global price of world price of fuel in any case, and then everything
yeah,
else
what the government does is the government does subsidize the fuel, so we will be paying even more money if there was no government subsidy.
Well, we have to leave it at that at this point. Okay, thanks very much to His Excellency Ambassador Peter Lansico for sharing with us some insight into the ongoing situation with respect to Cuba at this time. Of course, we are at the end of our program, and we thank you for listening. For those who are following online as well, and we wish you an absolutely wonderful weekend. Please stay safe. If you're heading to the cricket, of course, do so safely, and don't drink and drive. Have a good one, St. Lucia. Take care. Bye-bye.